the liberal elements in Egypt, the ones who were really spewing or putting forth hate towards the Brotherhood, calling them fascists and justifying the army massacres against them, will say it was not a coup. They will insist it's not a coup. But if you ask the true revolutionary forces and the true left forces, not, as in India, there's many with a left face, but are truly not grounded in left values. If you ask the true revolutionary forces, they will tell you that yes, it was indeed a coup, and for many of them it was disappointment. They saw it as being a people's movement that was hijacked by a coup. Others knew that this would happen and debated whether or not to even go on the streets on June 30th. And if you ask them, these revolutionary forces, particularly these left organizations that I mentioned, sort of about the state of things, they will say, I think what we all can conclude from looking at what has been happening in Egypt, that there was no sufficient political alternative that was ready and prepared on the ground to emerge and to rise up when the revolution began. There's a question as to whether or not the revolution was still there. I don't refer to the other uprisings that have happened in the Arab world as revolutions, necessarily. I did view what had happened, or the process that began in Egypt in 2011 as a revolutionary process. And whether or not it's still there is a huge question. We're fighting against this drowning from counter-revolutionary forces, and continued and probably will be increased repression against the remaining true revolutionary forces and those forces that have the potential of becoming a revolutionary force. But the one lesson that we've learned is that the movement must be ready with sort of a true revolutionary party or a true political alternative that can fit into sort of the plan, like what's going to happen next from this step on. I think in some ways things manifested themselves a little bit differently in Tunis because they had a wider, stronger, broader left base. But I don't know enough to comment too much on that, and there are different circumstances that are happening there. And if you also sort of have this discussion with these revolutionary forces that are still there about, well, okay, we acknowledge that there isn't a sufficient revolutionary force on the ground now, but it seems that the revolutionary process is still there, and so what sort of do we need to do to move forward? And their answer will be to support the continued existence of this very strong and militant workers. But even with that, we're starting to sort of see a situation as wonderful and significant and militant as the workers' movement has been from 2006, 2008 to this past year. We're now beginning to see a situation where the counter-revolutionary forces are also penetrating even more deeply also the workers' movement. We have the Egyptian Trade Union Federation, which is the establishment union, it's the government union that exists under Mubarak, and sides with the needs and values of the business class. There is the newly emerged Democratic Workers' Congress, and there is an independent union, the Egyptian Federation of Independent Trade Unions. And the leader of that union is Kamal al-Etta, and it had been regarded as being sort of a progressive left independent union federation that had the potential of supporting the independent workers movement that was taking place. Kananga Waita just accepted an appointment with this new interim government as labor minister. And when he did so, he called for a suspension of strikes to give the new government a chance. There are more radical, more progressive elements in his organization that opposed him, but so we're beginning to see that these challenges are now creeping into the labor movement in itself. I think in Egypt, as well as I see in other places in the Arab world, like in Jordan, that the increasing militant worker struggles are happening independent of establishment unions and also independent of these new independent federation formations. They're happening very much in within workplaces, within cities, within towns. And I think, the important step forward is to think about then how within Egypt and outside of Egypt on a global level that we can support the sustainability of this unionization movement, especially the independent unionization movement. And I think I wanted to share with you what I have here. Perhaps we can get it to you somehow, but there's a woman by the name of Fatima Ramadan, and she's the president of the board of the Egyptian Federation of Independent Trade Unions, the same one where I told you the leader took a position as labor minister and called for suspension of strikes. She opposed him. She herself is coming from a long socialist tradition and a working class tradition in Egypt. And last Friday, Sisi, the military general, called for the people of Egypt to return to the streets. And essentially, he was calling for them to come and support their, the new rule, military interim government rule, and essentially to support their vicious, violent campaign against the Brotherhood. It's not that the Brotherhood haven't been violent themselves; they have in many places. But what the military has been doing against them is nothing short of a massacre. And all three federations that I mentioned chose to sign on and join that march that happened last Friday. Fatima Ramadan was one of the few union leaders who refused, and she wrote a very excellent statement addressed to Egyptian workers as to why they should not participate in the call for the military to march last Friday. And the left coalitions also abstained from that march as well. But perhaps there's some way I can share that statement with you. Maybe we'll get it translated to Hindi. It's actually a very excellent statement, and we'll circulate it. Okay, thank you very much.